It's The Real News. I'm Aaron Mate. If Russia did try to influence the 2016 U.S. election, how does that compare to other cases of foreign meddling? Well, a new database has a comprehensive answer. Levin of Carnegie Mellon University looked at U.S. and Russian interference in other countries' elections since the Second World War. According to Levin, the U.S. was far in the lead, interfering over 80 times. And this does not count military coups and violent regime change, such as in Iran, Chile, or Guatemala. Levin is a postdoctoral fellow in the Institute for Politics and Strategy at Carnegie Mellon University. His research project is called Partisan Electoral Interventions by the Great Powers. Dr. Levin, welcome.
Thank you for inviting me.
Can you tell us a few of the examples that stood out to you looking back over this long period of election interference that you think were most interesting?
Well, one interesting example was the American intervention in the 1948 Italian election. In this case, the United States was extremely worried that the Communist Party, the Italian Communist Party, may win that election, a case in which the United States was worried would lead, to Italian democracy ending, and also that Italy would become a communist and become an ally of the Soviet Union. So as a result, the United States began a massive covert and overt operation designed to prevent Italian voters from voting for the communists. So it included, for example, increasing massively American foreign aid to Italy. So the United States increased by about $250 million its aid to Italy in the months before the election. The election day, which, and by the way, today's money is around, I think, about $1.8 billion aid increase. At the same time, it was multiple times threatening that all U.S. aid to Italy would be completely cut if the communists would win power in Italy. It also did some covert operations at the same time. So, for example, the CIA was giving the Christian Democrats, the main anti-communist party then in power under the leadership of Italian Prime Minister De Gasperi, a lot of campaign funding to the tune of about $10 million, or in today's money, it's around $80 million. It also sent in a very large number of campaigning experts that did everything from, preparing campaigning materials for the Christian Democrats, as well as teaching them various mobilization techniques for this purpose.
Now, Dr. Levin, what stands out to me is another case that is only starting to get attention recently because of the allegations against Russia, and that is the U.S. role in Russia's elections in the mid-90s with Yeltsin. Can you talk about that?
Well, the United States did intervene in one such election to our knowledge in the 1996 Russian election in the favor of Boris Yeltsin. And the idea there was basically that the United States was really worried that the Communist Party candidate Gennady Zyuganov would win power, would have a very good chances of winning that election, in which case it was worried that he would, reverse a lot of the economic reforms that occurred in Russia at the time and restart the Cold War. Likewise, many of the other candidates that were in other available presidential candidates were very unattractive. One of the other presidential candidates was an outspoken anti-Semite. Another one was a person who was a certified nut, someone who literally came out of a mental institution and that was talking about, taking back from the United States Alaska. So they were also not attractive. So the United States decided in this case to support Boris Yeltsin, who was at the time literally last in the polls. I was thinking one poll he was polling only 6% and last of 5 candidates. And for that purpose, the United States pressured the IMF to give Russia a loan of about $10 billion, which was the the second largest loan given by the IMF at the time, and second largest loan given at the IMF at the time, although Russia at the time was not eligible under regular IMF criteria to such a loan. And basically, about $1.3 billion of that loan arrived to Russia before this election. And then Yeltsin used that money in order to, pay wage arrears for government workers who did not get their wages paid for months, as well as, for various pork projects, so that, naturally improved his popularity. And we also sent, American campaign advisors from the former Pete Wilson campaign to give, advice to the Yeltsin campaign. Yeah, from the Pete Wilson campaign in California to give him advice, on how to run the campaign, on better ads, on polling, and so forth. And they helped, make sure that he ran, a better campaign and, ran better ads and so forth. And those two factors are believed to have helped Yeltsin reach in the first round the situation where he was ahead of Gennady Zyuganov and eventually, win that election.
Okay, so it's really interesting to compare that one case to what Russia is accused of doing now. So let's talk about that. I have two questions. In terms of what Russia is accused of doing, so leaking emails, fake news, and social media bots, if I have that correctly, that's what they're accused of doing. A, I'm wondering how impactful you think that was on this election, and B, how you think it stacks up in comparison to all the other cases that you've studied going back to the Second World War.
Well, first, just to make it clear, given the evidence, it is pretty certain that there was indeed such an intervention by Russia in the 2016 U.S. election. The method used by Russia for this purpose, aside of the hacking, was not a new method. That is, the hacking itself was indeed new. But the particular method they use, which I call, dirty tricks, or, basically leaking information that makes one of the sides look bad, in this regard, is not a new method. It's a method that was regularly used by Russia and in a few cases also by the United States frequently in the past. I actually find in my data set that the Russians have, or beforehand the Soviets have, that's the second most frequent method that they have used in their interventions since World War II in this regard. As for their overall effectiveness, it is too early to tell. That is, I know that the average effect of these interventions is a 3% increase in the vote share of the side that is being assisted. However, that is, a statistical average. Sometimes it's much more, sometimes it's much less. Given the magnitude of the election victory by Donald Trump, that was a very narrow election victory based on, about 100,000 voters in 3 states. It is quite possible that that was the thing that made the difference. However, it is nevertheless too early to tell yet in this particular case. We are still waiting for more evidence, which hopefully, the various investigations in this regard will be able to provide a conclusive answer in one way or the other.
Okay, and in terms of how it compares to other elections, other election interference.
Yeah.
If it's, I want to say, I don't share your conclusion. I don't think it's been proven yet that Russia did anything. We have the claims of anonymous officials, and we have a lot of supposition and speculation, but I don't think we've seen hard evidence yet. But anyway, even if it is all true, how does it compare in terms of its magnitude with the interference in all these other places that you studied?
Well, basically, it is compared to many other interventions. As I said, it is an average magnitude compared to many other interventions. That is, the magnitude of the intervention done is about on par to many other electoral interventions that I have studied in that have occurred since World War II, so to speak.
Dr. Levin, okay, so given that, but let me ask you then about the rhetoric that we hear, because the way it's talked about among some people here in the U.S. is in terms of war. We hear people calling this international warfare, talking about a Russian attack on our election. Rhetorically, what do you think of this language that has been used to describe Russia's alleged meddling?
Again, I am not an expert on American media. I'm a scholar of international relations. Naturally, what I find as a scholar of international relations studying these cases, that usually the targets of such interventions are not happy when they become targets of such interventions, and they usually are very unhappy when they discover such interventions. You know, when these things are overt, usually they are, of course, very unhappy. And when covert interventions of these kinds become exposed, they're especially unhappy. So what happened, that we are seeing, a lot of people extremely unhappy about the exposure of the Russian intervention is not unusual in this regard, so to speak. People tend to be unhappy about foreign meddling by a foreign power in their election processes.
And fair enough. We'll leave it there. Dov Levin, postdoctoral fellow in the Institute for Politics and Strategy at Carnegie Mellon University. His research project is called Partisan Electoral Interventions by the Great Powers. Dr. Levin, thank you.
Thank you very much.
And thank you for joining us on The Real News.